Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something huge, the structural transformation of China's coal sector.
Right. And this is so much more than just an energy story.
It's a profound human story, a huge political challenge.
It truly is. I mean, when you talk about decarbonization on this scale, you're reshaping the world's largest coal industry.
And the human cost of that is just immense.
Exactly.
Mm.
Employment security is becoming, maybe quietly but very fiercely, one of the most critical challenges for Chinese policymakers right now.
And our sources confirm this isn't a sudden shock. It's a deliberate, multi-year process of, a slow structural transformation.
A very slow one. But that doesn't make it painless.
No. And that impact from mine closures, consolidation, and just a freeze on new investment, it's becoming more and more visible.
It is. So our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack those dynamics for you.
And to show you what this all means for China's really precarious balancing act between climate goals and social stability.
The scale is what's so hard to grasp. This industry was the economic anchor for millions of families.
Especially in those inland provinces with few, if any, other options.
Precisely. So as these reforms pick up speed, managing the fallout, the displaced workers, the collapsing regional economies, it moves from being just an economic problem to a frontline social and political priority for Beijing.
Okay, let's unpack this with some geography. If the job losses are rising, where are they actually concentrated? And, what makes those places so vulnerable?
Yeah, the disruption is absolutely not uniform across the country.
It's targeted.
It's very targeted. It hits provinces that have built their entire economic and even social identity around coal. We're talking about 4 major regions facing the most severe impact.
And these are
Shaanxi, Inner Mongolia, Shanxi, and Henan.
When you list those names, you're basically listing the heartland of Chinese thermal coal production for decades.
For decades, exactly. And their vulnerability is systemic. They rely on coal for so much more than just the miners' paychecks.
Right, it's a whole ecosystem.
It's the local tax revenues. Think about it. The money from those state-owned mines, it funds the local government, the schools, the hospitals.
Everything. The roads.
Everything. So when a mine closes, the entire municipal budget just gets gutted.
So you have a government with no money, and at the same time, thousands of people losing their jobs. The economic impact must be exponential.
That's the critical negative feedback loop that economists are warning about.
What does that loop look like on the ground?
Well, the closures, the early retirements, the layoffs, they create this growing pressure on local governments that can barely afford to manage unemployment as it is.
And I imagine the miner who loses his job at a mine in Shaanxi, he suddenly isn't spending money at the local market.
Or the restaurants, or the repair shops. That lack of spending can collapse the whole local retail sector.
And that just accelerates the whole slowdown.
It becomes a self-reinforcing contraction, and it makes it incredibly difficult for those areas to ever pivot to something new because they're always just fighting this decline.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics of this because this is where it gets really interesting. It's not just about entire mines shutting down.
No, that's really only half the story.
So what are the other ways that labor demand is shrinking, even at the mines that are still open and, doing well?
Right. The long-term reduction comes from 3 big drivers, and they all apply to the mines that are still operational.
Okay, so lay them out for us. Driver number 1.
First is consolidation. There's a huge effort to absorb all the smaller independent operators into these massive state-owned mining groups, the SOEs.
And these big conglomerates, they're looking for economies of scale.
Exactly, which means they immediately get rid of redundant jobs, both in management and labor, as soon as they merge.
So from an efficiency standpoint, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But you're creating these massive monopolies that might be less responsive to, say, labor issues.
That is the tension right there.
Yeah.
Efficiency creates these incredibly powerful job-shedding companies, which leads to the second driver, and this one is maybe the most critical for the future. It's automation and mechanization.
The robots?
Pretty much. Even the most successful, most advanced mines are shedding workers because their productivity is just surging.
Can you give us a tangible example of what that looks like?
Sure, think about automated longwall mining. It used to take hundreds of workers to manage all the hydraulic supports and conveyors to move a wall of coal.
Right.
Today, you have integrated systems operated remotely that can shear and move the coal with almost no human intervention. A mine that needed maybe 3,000 workers a decade ago.
Can now do the same with 1,000.
Or even less. So even success is now tied directly to getting rid of jobs.
Wow. So a thriving modern mine is still a massive job loser.
No.
What's the third mechanism?
The third is the investment freeze. Historically, workers could move from an old mine to a new expansion project, a new shaft being developed somewhere else.
But those projects are drying up.
They've been delayed or canceled. So the industry has stopped being a perpetual job creator. It's now in a state of permanent net job shedding.
And when you put those three together, consolidation, automation, and the investment freeze, our sources are pointing to a pretty sobering conclusion.
Yeah, that new job creation is just, well, it's no longer sufficient to offset the losses. It confirms we are looking at a sustained fundamental contraction.
So policymakers have to know this is happening, and they've rolled out programs, compensation, retraining, things like that.
They have.
But the reports we're seeing suggest these efforts are really struggling to absorb the sheer number of displaced workers. Why is the system getting bottlenecked?
The main bottleneck is what we call the skills mismatch. It's a chasm, really.
What do you mean by that?
Imagine a miner. He's spent 30 years underground. His skills are incredibly specialized geology, massive hydraulic systems, specific safety protocols.
These aren't general skills you can just take anywhere.
Exactly. He knows how to operate this complex, very specific equipment, but that skill set is it's effectively useless in a high-tech factory or in the service sector.
You can't just turn a tunnel engineer into a software developer overnight.
Not easily. The retraining is long, the skills don't transfer well, and for an older worker, the motivation to completely start over is, understandably, pretty low.
And that's just the first problem. The second must be regional.
It's the amplifier. We go back to Shaanxi or Inner Mongolia. These regions just don't have a diversified industrial base. There are no alternative employers ready to hire.
So you can retrain someone, but if there's no job for them within 100 miles,
Then the retraining has failed. It hasn't secured stable employment, which was its whole purpose.
it sounds like these job losses are at risk of becoming something much deeper than temporary unemployment. They risk becoming structural.
That is the structural threat. And it's the most corrosive kind of joblessness because it means the industry that defined that person's life and their whole community will never hire them again.
And this must hit older workers the hardest.
Absolutely. A 50-year-old miner is too young to retire, but a company sees him as too old to invest in for a whole new career. And it just cripples these remote mining towns that have no other economic foundation at all.
Okay, so you have a jobs crisis, a local finance crisis, a major skills mismatch. How does this mountain of pressure affect the central government's strategy? I mean, they're juggling global climate goals, national energy needs, and now this urgent need for social stability.
It creates a huge policy paradox. And that paradox basically sets the pace for the entire energy transition.
And what's anchoring that pace?
Energy security. The overwhelming need for security slows everything down. China still relies so heavily on coal, over 60% of its power, to keep the lights on.
And they had those power shortages a few years ago, which must have reinforced that.
Brutally. That lesson was crystal clear. You cannot let your climate goals compromise the grid. The risk of economic chaos and public unrest is just too high.
So that created a lot of caution.
Deep caution. The strategy now is this very careful, very protracted balancing act. They keep enough coal production going to meet energy demand, while at the same time forcing modernization and only gradually reducing the number of jobs.
So concerns over social unrest are basically acting as a brake.
They are the main constraint. It prompts this very deliberate, phased approach rather than sudden disruptive layoffs.
That phased approach sounds responsible on the surface, but it must come with a huge financial cost, which our sources say is putting a massive strain on the state-owned coal companies.
The strain is immense. When one of these SOEs closes a mine, it has to cover massive non-negotiable costs.
Like what?
Huge severance payments, pension obligations, environmental cleanup for the site, and all the debt that the now closed operation had built up.
And these SOEs can't just declare bankruptcy like a private company might. They're seen as part of the social safety net.
They absolutely are. They have to balance all these huge social responsibilities with the need to stay profitable in a sector that's in long-term decline. It's an impossible position.
And what happens if a smaller, weaker company just can't meet those obligations, if they just buckle under the weight of it all?
That's when the instability risk really skyrockets. A sudden failure means abrupt layoffs, social unrest, and then the local government is forced to step in and clean up the mess.
And they have to absorb the financial burden, even though their own tax base is eroding.
Exactly. The state is essentially funding a transition that requires both stability and collapse at the same time.
So we've established that employment stability is now, it's central to the whole debate. It's almost on the same level as the climate targets.
Right.
So what's the outlook? Where do future efforts go from here?
Well, future policies are expected to focus overwhelmingly on just slowing the pace of these workforce reductions. They want to make that downward curve as shallow and as long as they possibly can.
And how do they do that?
We expect to see a lot more energy and funding put into two key areas. First, expanding those retraining programs, but with a critical twist.
Making them geographically relevant.
Exactly. And second, actively supporting the development of real, genuine alternative industries inside these coal regions. You have to build a new economic reason for that town to exist.
So it's not enough to retrain the worker. You have to make sure there's a factory or logistics hub or something right there ready to hire them.
That is the new policy priority in a nutshell. As China dismantles the world's largest coal sector, managing these job losses might prove just as critical and certainly more politically sensitive day to day as hitting those long-term emissions targets.
This has been a really complex deep dive for you, our listener. We've tried to look past the easy headline of China closes coal mines to understand the localized pain in places like Shaanxi, the force of automation, that devastating skills mismatch, and the government's struggle to fund a slow, stable decline.
Yeah.
It just shows that the world's biggest energy transition requires the toughest trade-offs between global climate goals, national energy security, and this incredibly sensitive local employment stability.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to mull over. If a coal miner's skills are truly that hard to transfer, and if building new, stable industries in these remote regions is just inherently slow and expensive,
Then does this phased approach, the slow decline,
does it really buy the time needed for real alternatives to take root? Or is it just a very expensive delay, pushing the inevitable reckoning with deep structural unemployment onto the next generation of local leaders?
we'll leave you with that question. Thanks for diving deep with us.